Good morning, good evening, everyone. Today we have our student Shruti Madhva, and she took a pre-match in psychiatry. This was her second cycle. So we wanted to understand the challenges she overcame and some tips that she may have for applicants applying in the coming season. So welcome, Shruti. Glad to have you.
Thank you. So hi everyone. My name is Shruti. I'm actually a US IMG. I went to India for medical school and graduated in 2019. So when I applied for the match cycle, I actually applied the 2021 cycle, and that was right when the pandemic hit. So I feel like with the pandemic, it was really hard for IMGs in general to find rotations or even applying. It allowed a lot more USMDs or DOs to apply more versatile, like how usually IMGs do. So when I applied for the 2021 match and didn't get through, so that was kind of like a tough pill to swallow. So for me, my entire journey, it was kind of essentially trying to figure out what I wanted, what my next steps were, what I exactly wanted to do or what my course was. So I took some time off and tried to reach out to see if I could do any more rotations in university hospitals. I think a big thing for many programs, rather than it's okay to have a few, private clinics, but I think they also want a lot more university associated rotations. So for that reason, I tried reaching out. Because of the pandemic, I felt like, there were a lot more closed doors or, people saying, I'll reach out to you again. So at that point, my options were kind of limited. So I really didn't want to reapply to the cycle with the same rotations or with the same letter of recommendations. So I feel like mine was a bit different, my process, because a lot more people, I think, went into scribes like US IMGs or even regular foreign medical graduates. A lot of them went into medical assistant or they did scribing. And that was something that I really didn't want to do, or that wasn't something that I felt was interesting to me. So I actually found a role in Florida. So they kind of focus on talking to doctors about, documentation, ICD-10 codes. So stuff that's kind of very important for you to know as a practicing physician or even as a resident, because especially in America, documentation is so heavy. So it's very important to know. So I think that was a big plus point for me, because during my interviews, one of the biggest questions I used to get was, what is different from, what makes you different from the people that are, coming from the same place with the same scores. So, I mean, the normal thing is I had a versatile patient load when I was in the, I feel like that's something that every IMG would say. So this gave me an opportunity to talk about my skill set. So this talked about documentation and, what my role was within, how I was able to learn clinically and have clinical conversations with doctors as well. So that was something that actually one of the interviewers actually kind of was interested in. So, that was something that was a talking point, and I felt like that let me have a more interpersonal connection. So I feel like finding a role that is suitable to you, what you think you might excel in, would be definitely important. And I also felt like when you're talking to physicians, you definitely need to be a lot more confident. And I felt like this job allowed me that, to be able to talk to doctors, have clinical discussions. So it really, I felt like it made me more confident too. So that was something that I felt like I lacked when I was applying in 2021. So even though I had interviews, I felt like maybe I wasn't portraying myself the way that I wanted to, or I wasn't coming off as confident as I should have. So I think that kind of helped me this year. So, yeah.
So as I understand, one of the challenges was obviously getting these university or affiliated rotations. So you focused on a job that allowed you to interact with the physician to build your confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So now, when it comes to other, kind of building your profile from the previous season, were there any changes from the last season to this season that you worked on?
So I actually mainly tried to, my first role was to try to find rotations. I did do a few more rotations before I got this job. And on top of that, I tried my level best to make sure I try to work more on interviewing skills. So I feel like as an IMG, we're at like a severe disadvantage when it comes to interviewing or having that casual conversation, because that is something that I actually learned from Sarthi, one of my mock interviewer panels. So, we talk so much about medicine and what medical cases. We don't really talk about that short conversations that a lot of American MDs are used to. So I felt like kind of easing into that and focusing more, being personal, being more genuine is something that I learned more with, doing these practice interviews and through this job. Whereas last year, any question that they asked, I tried to tie back to, I did this in my rotation, or I did that in rotation. So even if they asked me something completely non-medical, I try to, bring it back to that. So for me, I think just trying to fine tune those interviewing skills and being more genuine, being more personal. I felt like that was something that I really changed. And I felt like I also, I felt like I saw the results, because for one of my interviews, even though it was virtual, they called me back for a second look. And a lot of it was because I felt like I talked more about myself and why I was so interested in a certain field, compared to last year when I was just kind of trying to talk to them to basically answer what I thought they wanted to hear. Yeah. So in that aspect, I think this year, I got called back for a second look and everything. That was supposed to be in person, but I didn't end up going because I'd already pre-matched by then. But I felt like that was something especially fine tuning the interview skills is very important, just because you have 10 minutes with a interviewer and through a virtual screen. So how much are you going to make an impact? So I feel like an interview and fine tuning that is very important, and that's kind of what I changed and focused on since my last cycle.
Now, are there differences you saw which psych looks for? I mean, what is so different in interviewing or application in psychiatry than compared to, say, family medicine? Was there a difference?
Yes, there definitely was. So for family medicine, I feel like, they didn't really ask about my passion for family. It was just more tell me what your experiences were. Whereas for psychiatry, a lot of the interviews, it was just mainly, okay, tell me about what was that one incident that kind of got you to be more involved in psych? Why did you like psych? So there's always a personal story. I mean, whether we want to, whether we like it or not, there's always something that would have, been okay, this is why I want to do psych. So that is something that if you are interviewing for a psych position, that's important to kind of figure out, because we might know it in our head, but when somebody asks you suddenly, trying to put it all together so that it's actually effective, it might not come out as strongly as we wanted to. So in my opinion, if somebody is applying for psychiatry, I would probably try to figure out what your story is, because that's what every time that they ask, what is your story? Why do you like psychiatry? What is that case? What is that one case that kind of, pushed you towards this is why I want to do it? So that is something that every single person that interviewed me asked, whether it was the residents, whether it was the interview panel, everybody asked what your story was, why you like psychiatry. So that is, being effective, having that personal story. It's okay to be open. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, I think another question that actually a lot of people in psych also asked was, why, not just psych, but I think that was more, at least with my experience, psych asked. So they were so why didn't you match last year? So I think those questions, especially if you did not match or you had a few previous attempts, I feel like having an answer for that is important. For me, personally, at that point, yes, I did feel I felt like my life was ending. And, I thought it just felt it was just very dramatic. But at the end, it's always, it's life, it happens. And I think being honest about it, being genuine about it, being open about your struggles is something that every program looks for. And at least that's my personal experience. And for psychiatry, especially, I think they look for more genuine and like people that are truly interested, and you really need to sell that. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Now, as we, kind of wrap up, what are your tips for applicants in the coming season? What would you do differently, or what were the things that you really, if you were to give them 2 or 3 things that they need to focus on, what would they be?
Okay, so I mean, like for me personally, just because I felt like it made a difference, I would definitely say fine tune those interview skills. Just because it's not even in person, so it's still virtual.
Yes.
So because of that, I mean, like that's the only way you can make, you might be an amazing candidate on paper, but if you're not interviewing effectively, it ruins your chances, I feel. So for me, my biggest advice would be make sure that you're practicing your interviewing skills, write it down, like whatever you want to say. There's always, if you go online or even through the YouTube videos on Sarthi, there's always like common questions that people ask. So just having your story and having everything written out, I feel like you're a lot more organized and you're more prepared for it. So for me personally, my biggest advice would be interview skills. Make sure that the letter of recommendations are, you're asking it from the people that are going to definitely build you up, and not something that's just kind of generic. And so I mean, like, and definitely program outreach. I feel like the more frequently that you're on their radar, the more likely you are also to get interviews. So yeah, those are my 3 big tips.
Well, thank you very much, Shruti. This was very, very useful. I think
Thank you.
Inspiring to other IMGs, especially those who may not have matched in the first cycle.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, and good luck in your residency.